Okay, thank you. This is going to be fun. We're going to have a little bit of an interactive dialogue here, so I'll probably do some walking around, and I'll also lower my mic since volume has never been my struggle. I'm a strategy consultant. I love to go and help solve complex problems. Early on in my career, I realized that just having the right idea wasn't too interesting. The brilliance was in the implementation. And it was much better to have an efficacious idea that had high impact than to have the right idea. One of the ways to go about doing that was building internal capacity. What I'm going to talk about today is a mechanism to inculcate capacity within an organization. We do this all the time, and it's a blast. And it's helping individuals harness the very best out of their teams. So we tell leaders, you don't have to have all the ideas. You don't have to be the smartest one in the room. There's a process in which you can get the very best thinking from within your group. Rigorous research has been done on how the best ideas percolate to the top and how the worst ideas percolate to the bottom. Drop to the bottom. And so we know the right processes that work. Now this slide, you notice Karen didn't have this because she's a Bain. Everybody knows Bain is amazing. This is my effort to say, hey, Cicero's cool too. A couple of weeks ago, we were rated in the Vault's top 50 consulting firms. I think we landed 40th, and I think we landed 4th as best places to work among consulting firms, which was really cool for us. Yes, I know, Karen, Bain was probably number 1, but we thought we were cool just being considered in the top 50. So that's a little plug on the firm before we start. So let's talk about effective group decision making. Raise of hands. What type of structure is most able to generate the very best decisions? Who thinks it's an individual? Who thinks it's a group? Okay, most of you think it's a group. All right. Well, let me ask this question then. What type of structure is most able to generate the very worst decisions? Who thinks it's an individual? Who thinks it's a group? Well, again, research would indicate that along this continuum, both the ceiling and the floor expand as you incorporate more people, and this is where the pejorative groupthink originates. When you get a group of people together and come up with a really, really, really dumb idea. The Nazis in the 40s probably modeled this the best, but if you look at history. There's multiple examples of groups coming together in order to just collectively decide on really stupid things. But there's a real reward if you learn how to harness your group in getting really good thinking. And again, rigorous research would suggest that simply by managing a process, it's pretty predictable what the outcome is going to be. So let's talk about this just briefly. When you want to realize the advantages of a group, when you're on the high side of this range, to get to the high side of this range, it's bringing a group together that has useful information. It's when team members feel like they're going to have a say, and they're going to be responsible for implementing what's ultimately decided. And as humans, we're pretty darn good at window dressing. So when you bring a group together to make a decision together that's hard, it can't be window dressing. Otherwise, they're going to see this. Now, when you're on the low side, making the worst decisions, it's usually because we fall prey to something for which we are all susceptible, and that's confirmation bias. Did my mic just go out? That's confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is that we see what we want to see. Stanford, a number of years ago, did a study in which they had a hypothesis. And their hypothesis was that if they were able to bring two divergent groups together, two groups that had very opposite viewpoints on something, but were able to give them really smart research. To what degree would they be able to coalesce around an idea? To what degree would they be able to bring them together? So they took the death penalty, and they had a peer-reviewed publication on why the death penalty was an effective deterrent to crime, and they had another peer-reviewed, published report on why the death penalty was not an effective deterrent to crime. And they brought in a group that was anti the death penalty and a group that was pro the death penalty, and they gave them both the reports. And what this would do would coalesce these two groups around this Venn diagram where they found real common areas of agreement. Wrong. That was the hypothesis. But the result was that both of these two polarized groups saw what they wanted to see. The people that were pro the death penalty were like, yeah, well, that report, that was published out of Berkeley. Bunch of liberal commies, right? I mean, you can't, look at their methodology. You can't trust what they came up with. And then the people that were opposed to the death penalty, a bunch of conservative BYU grads were who published that report, right? I mean, how could you trust those results? And what it did was it pushed them to their respective sides even more. It actually polarized them. So what happens when you think of this confirmation bias of where we see what we want to see, when you bring it into a group, the ramifications can be much worse. It's what we might refer to as stampede effect. Lemmings. The term group polarization effect is the official term, but I like the idea. I'm a Texas boy. I like the idea of this stampede. And what happens when we bring a group in is that an idea, we go along to get along. The group starts migrating in a certain direction, and what we're reluctant to challenge the assumptions, right? We don't want to be the naysayer. And so, and we see this in government all the time. Well, I had a neighbor who saw this happen. I had a friend who had a cousin who heard, right? And we start believing that an anecdote equals the truth. Data is not the plural of anecdote. And yet stories that grip at our heart really become compelling. And what happens is we underestimate the downside and we start overestimating the upside, and we narrow our solution set prematurely. And I would suggest, and I'd probably suggest more strongly in this group than any other group, the stronger the cohesiveness of the group, the stronger the similarities. Look around in this group, right? I mean, this is like the forum of white men. And what happens is that when you have a strong similarities in the group, strong cohesiveness in the group, that the likelihood of falling prey to the stampede effect becomes even greater. So I'm going to have a little bit of fun. How am I doing on time? Good. I haven't even hit my 10 minutes yet. I wanted to be to this point before 10 minutes to stay on schedule. I was an American Heritage TA for 3 years while I was at BYU. I love history. Karen and I, when we were standing out in the lobby just talking, we talked about, we both were teachers, what do you call them, like graduate assistants or whatever, in business school, and then we were tutors. And she commented, it was the best paying job I ever had. I said, me too, it was so awesome up to that stage, right? Well, I had that at American Heritage when I was at BYU. So I love to study history. So what I want to do in order to illustrate this point is we're going to do a quick case study of 2 situations in American history. One was the Bay of Pigs. The second was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, there's a reason for this. Number one, before the famous Nixon tapes, secret tapes. There was the Kennedy tapes. So we literally know who said what, who was in the room, what was decided, how it was decided because of the Kennedy tapes. The second is that this is a fascinating study because the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred about 18 months apart from one another and was almost the exact same group of people in the room. One followed the process that we've outlined. One did not. So let's start with the Bay of Pigs. You've got Castro in the middle, but it really was the Soviet versus the United States. It was Khrushchev, General Khrushchev and John F. Kennedy. It started before Kennedy was president. President Eisenhower approved the CIA's plan to remove Castro. Kennedy was running for president, so he and Nixon, who were running against each other, were both briefed on the plan by the CIA director. The plan for invasion was approved by Eisenhower, but it was stipulated that no U.S. military personnel could be part of the combat force. The plan for invasion included U.S. aircraft bombing, 1,400 Cuban exile volunteers, and U.S. military battleships offshore to provide support to Cuban freedom fighters when they needed it. But we would have complete deniability. There weren't going to be American troops on the ground. Yeah, our ships and our training and everything like that, but who would know? Except for the fact that the New York Times runs a front page story saying that the U.S. is helping train anti-Castro forces at a secret Guatemalan base. And so on April 17th, 1961, we invade. Nothing can go wrong. Baloney. 200,000 troops at his disposal. Castro contains the invasion, and we have 114 insurgents killed. We have to negotiate for the others' release with a bunch of money, and the United States loses a lot of cachet in international diplomacy. So what went wrong in this entire process? What went wrong was before. Does anybody here? Now we start asking questions. Who was Kennedy's dad? And what was he famous for? Anyone? Who was JFK's dad? And he was an ambassador to England. And what was he infamous for? Okay, yep. I would get that in Provo. Go. The Munich appeasement. The Munich appeasement. And so a lot of people blamed him for going to Adolf Hitler after they had invaded what was at the time Czechoslovakia and saying, okay, we're okay with this for you annexing this land so long as you don't do any more. And that was infamously referred to as the Munich appeasement. It was a complete debacle. So JFK did something incredible. When he ran against Nixon, he got to the right of Nixon on communism. And everybody knew this. And everybody knew he had the Achilles heel about his dad and the Munich appeasement. And so he had just come into office, and everybody read the room, and they said, what can go wrong? Yeah, let's do this. Let's get tough on the commies. And the result was that it was an absolute debacle. They didn't appropriately challenge assumptions. They weren't encouraged to disagree. They didn't adequately evaluate the data that was so easily accessible. And we look at journals afterwards, and we discover that well over half of the people in the room thought it was a pretty dumb idea and that there were real flaws, but they didn't speak up. So there are 4 steps. Focus on topics and questions that matter most. Second, gather accurate information. During this phase, at least 80% of what's being said ought to be phrased as a question. This is information gathering. Now, this process works not just in business. It works in volunteer capacities, and it works in your family. We call it family council. My 11-year-old is here. Now, she's a precarious, stubborn, very smart 11-year-old, and when we have family council, she'll sometimes say, Dad, I think we're going to the convergent phase too quickly, which means I'm not getting my way, And I'm fearful that a decision contrary to what I want is going to be decided. So let's go back to the divergent phase where we're getting all the good ideas on the table. But it's actually an interesting phenomenon. I first learned and saw this modeled by Keith Allred. Keith Allred was a professor at Harvard University while I was studying there in business school. I love Keith Allred. I served with him in an ecclesiastic role. And I remember one day in his office vehemently arguing for something. This is what we ought to do. And I remember vividly Keith saying, really like your thinking, Randy. Give me 2 reasons why your idea won't work. I remember being shocked. I was like, why my idea won't work? Have you not been listening for the last 15 minutes of me building the case for why we ought to do this, Keith? No. Give me 2 reasons why your idea won't work, Randy. And I did. And we ultimately walked out of the room with a very different approach than what I had began the argument with, because he was smart enough to step back and say, let's think about this. Let's think about this. So, I said before the Nixon secret tapes, there was the Kennedy secret tapes. Now let's look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. I laid the foundation, now we have fun, okay? We're gonna watch 4 clips from 13 days. This great show. And what's great about it is because we had the Kennedy clips, we not only know who said what, but we know when they said it, and we know the tone and approach in which they said it. And while most shows are Hollywoodized, this actually follows it really, really, really closely to the transcripts. What I want you to do is we're going to build up and see how Kennedy started jumping to the convergent phase way too fast, and then realizing the ramifications of his decisions push back. And we start seeing some really vital characteristics for any team as they start to make effective group decision making. Is my volume good enough, Dayton? Should I go? Nope, my volume is not good enough. So let's start again. Okay, I'm going to start again. Should we go again, guys? Yeah, good. Nope. Go backwards, Mike. And, yep. Okay, let's try again. Yep. Let's try it again. Otherwise, we're going to rely on me mimicking John F. Kennedy, right? There's me up here dancing as we do it.
Okay.
All righty. So, Mike, let's go back. All right, let's do it. Mike, there we go.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary.
President.
Bob, that you had a late night.
Sleep is for the weak, Mr. President.
Thanks.
Mr. President, CIA's been notified. McCone's on his way back from the West Coast. He's been burying his stepson. General Carter's here, though.
Ted? Kenny?
Okay. Let's have it.
Arthur? Gentlemen, as most of you now know, U-2 over Cuba Sunday morning took a series of disturbing photographs. Our analysis at NPIC indicates that the Soviet Union has followed up its conventional weapons buildup in Cuba with the introduction of surface-to-surface medium-range ballistic missiles, or MRBMs. Our official estimate at this time is that this missile system is the SS-4 Sandal. We do not believe that the missiles are as yet operational. Ironbark reports that the SS-4 can deliver a 3-megaton nuclear weapon 1,000 miles. So far, we've identified 32 missiles serviced by about 3,400 men, undoubtedly all Soviet personnel. Our cities and military installations in the southeast, as far north as Washington, D.C., are in range of these weapons. and in the event of a launch would have only 5 minutes of warning.
5 minutes, gentlemen.
In those 5 minutes, they could kill 80 million Americans and destroy a significant percentage of our bomber bases, degrading our retaliatory options. The Joint Chiefs' consensus, Mr. President, is that this signals a major doctrinal shift in Soviet thinking to a first strike policy. It is a massively destabilizing move.
How long until they're operational?
General Taylor can answer that question better than I can.
GMAC, Guided Missiles Intelligence Committee, estimates 10 to 14 days. The crash program could limit that time. However, I must stress that there may be more missiles that we don't know about. We need more U-2 coverage.
Gentlemen, I want first reactions here. Assuming for the moment that Khrushchev has not gone off the deep end and intends to start World War III, what are we looking at?
Mr. President, I believe my team is in agreement. If we permit the introduction of nuclear missiles to a Soviet satellite nation in our hemisphere, the diplomatic consequences will be too terrible to contemplate. The Russians are trying to show the world they can do whatever they want, wherever they want, and we're powerless to stop them. If they succeed...
It'll be Munich all over again.
Yes, appeasement only makes the aggressor more aggressive. And the Soviets will be emboldened to push us even harder. Now, we must remove the missiles one way or another. Now, it seems to me the options are either some combination of international pressure and action on our part till they give in, or we hit them, an airstrike.
Bob?
We've worked up several military scenarios. Before I ask General Taylor to take us through the various options, I'd like for us to adopt a rule. If we decide to strike, we must agree now to do it before the missiles become operational. Because once they are, I don't think we can guarantee getting them all before at least some of them are launched.
Well, it's clear we cannot permit Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. We have to get those missiles out.
All right, what are we seeing happen? We don't have a ton of time, so just start shouting things out. What are we seeing happen? Everybody's agreeing. Based on how much information? A photograph? And what are the assumptions? What are the assumptions that we're making? We're all agreeing, and we've got some photographs, so we know a few things. What are the things they're saying they know? 32 missiles? Great. 32 missiles. Are they operational? Not yet. When will they be operational? Okay, 10 to 14 days. 32 missiles, nuclear missiles, not operational yet. They will be in 10 to 14 days. Put that on the shelf. That will be very, very critical to come back to, okay? Are we seeing any emotional play here? Seeing any manipulation?
He mentions Munich.
Ah, Munich all over. My wife, wonderful, wonderful woman. Her mom's name is Sherry. Early on in our marriage, she and I are in an argument on something. I can't remember what it was. I was like, okay, Sherry, right? That did not work out very well for me. And I have never made that mistake again, referring to my mom as my wife by my mother-in-law's first name. When we go after the Achilles heel, that doesn't work. Anything else we saw that was manipulative?
I think it was interesting that one of the advisors said our team is in agreement.
Dean Russ, Secretary of State. It's called pile on. Me and everybody else thinks this. It's called pile on. Others.
Well, he said once it's operational, I have to agree, like the strike group before. Like you made a cutoff.
Bob McNamara, who's one of the most brilliant business minds ever, just made one of the most catastrophic mistakes. He said, let's agree now to narrow down our option set to just one thing, right? I mean, talk about, narrowing your options way, way, way prematurely. But let's just agree, if this is the case, we're agreeing right now this is what we're going to do. Oh, no, don't eliminate your options so darn quickly. There's one more that I thought was interesting. Again, it was Dean Rusk. He said something, We hear these quips all the time. I heard somebody in a meeting, they said, if you're not faithful in the small things, you won't be faithful in the big things. And everybody's like, yeah, and the entire presentation was based on that. It was the most stupid comment I'd ever heard. Because it was like, what, am I gonna run home, smack my kids upside the head because they forgot to clean their room, so they're gonna become mass murderers? And yet, nobody questioned the quip because it was so darn interesting. Appeasement only makes the aggressor more aggressive. No, that's not true. Usually extending a friendly hand or picking up the phone and reconciling things is what resolves things. But they're throwing out these silly little quips that start generating decisions prematurely. All right, let's go to the next one.
We have 850 planes assembling at Homestead, Eglin, Opelika, MacDill, Patrick, Pensacola, and Key West. Due to the tropical foliage, the op plan calls for high explosive and napalm loadouts for our ground attack sorties.
I still think there are diplomatic approaches we haven't considered yet.
Jesus, Adley, peace at any price? We have a gun to our head.
We have high confidence in the expanded airstrike option, Mr. President. The problem is, sir, is that it's a short-term solution. Khrushchev can send in more missiles next month. The chiefs and I believe we should follow up the airstrikes with a full version of Op Plan 316.
An invasion?
Yes, sir. We can be sure we get all the missiles and we remove Castro. So this can never happen again.
Is this the Joint Chiefs recommendation?
Yes, sir. Our best option, as Bob pointed out this morning, would be to commence the strikes before the missiles become operational. The invasion happens 8 days later.
Dean, what do you think?
Gentlemen, for the last 15 years, I have fought here at this table, alongside your predecessors, in the struggle against the Soviet. Now, I do not wish to seem melodramatic, but I do wish to impress upon you a lesson I learned with bitter tears and great sacrifice. The Soviet understands only one language, action, respects only one word, force. I concur with General Taylor. I recommend, sir, airstrikes followed by invasion, perhaps preceded by an ultimatum to dismantle the missiles, if that is militarily viable.
So it appears we have three options. Number one, a surgical airstrike against the missiles themselves. Two, a much larger airstrike against their air defenses, along with the missiles. And three, invasion. So we're certainly going to do number one. We're going to take these missiles out. It seems to me we can't wait very long. We should at least be making those preparations.
We're preparing to implement all three options, though I must stress again, sir, there are risks to the strikes without the follow-on invasion.
We want to be clear, Mr. President, that we've definitely decided against a political track.
Dean, how does this all play out?
Your first step, sir, will be to demand that the Soviet withdraw the missiles within 12 to 24 hours. They will refuse. When they do, you will order the strikes, followed by the invasion. They will resist and be overrun. They will retaliate against another target somewhere else in the world, most likely Berlin. We will honor our treaty commitments and resist them there, defeating them per our plans.
Those plans call for the use of nuclear weapons. So what is the next step?
Hopefully cooler heads will prevail before we reach the next step.
Thank you, gentlemen.
We don't see it in this clip, but the generals view him as quite weak because he's incapable of making a decision. What do you guys think? What's going on here? What's going on? What do you think? What's Kennedy doing right? Let's start there. What's Kennedy doing right? Some of them are a little less conspicuous than others. What's Kennedy doing right? Yes? He's resisting that. Good, good. What else? He's taking a step back and he's asking questions. And he's repeating, is this what I'm hearing? What does Dean Acheson say? He says, let's play this out. And what does Dean Acheson say? We'll do this, they'll do this. We'll do this, they'll do this. We'll do this, we'll do this. And Kennedy says, so nuclear war? And then Dean Acheson says, hopefully cooler heads will prevail. Now, I don't want to take anything away from Dean Acheson. Here's another thing Kennedy did really smart. He had the smartest minds around the table. He brought the right people to the discussion. Dean Acheson was the Secretary of State for Harry S. Truman. He was viewed as probably the most adept diplomat in the country at the time. So he's bringing the right people to the table. But they were charging him in one direction, and he smartly stepped back and said, hold on, hold on. We've jumped to the convergence stage way too fast. I'm going to force us back. Now, he puts his brother in charge to come up with additional ideas, and watch what so brilliantly occurs from this point forward.
The full spectrum of airstrikes is the minimum response the Joint Chiefs will accept.
No, no, no. Now, there is more than one option here. And if one isn't occurring to us, it's because we haven't thought hard enough.
Bobby, sometimes there is only one right choice, and you thank God when it's so clear.
You're talking about a sneak attack. How will that make us look? A big country blasting a little one into the Stone Age. Oh, we'll be everyone's favorites.
Come on, Bobby, that's naive. This is the real world. You know that better than anybody.
And you weren't so ethically particular when we were talking about options for removing Castro over at CIA.
Bob, if we go ahead with these airstrikes, you know what it'll come to in the end. There has got to be something else. Give it to me. Now, I don't care how crazy, inadequate, or stupid it sounds. Give it to me.
6 months ago, we gamed out a scenario. It's slow, it doesn't get rid of the missiles, it's got a lot of drawbacks. The scenario calls for a blockade of Cuba.
Okay. We're limited on time. Let's kind of end with that clip. We won't show the last one. It doesn't matter. We know what happens. Okay? What is continuing to occur before Bobby Kennedy stops it? What are we seeing? Samuel, you said pile on earlier. They do it again. We all agree. We heard comments about going after the Achilles heel. Oh, you weren't so ethical when you were back, right? I mean, we go after the emotional. They're forcing him into a decision prematurely. And Bobby Kennedy does something that keeps us out of World War III, and it's absolutely brilliant. What is it? Dave? Bob, I don't care how stupid or crazy the idea, give me an alternative. Good leaders give voice to the silent majority. Good leaders ask questions. Good leaders give room for crazy ideas. Good leaders start seeing this stampede occur happening, and they stop it and they say, all right, give me a reason why we shouldn't do that. Give me two alternatives. I don't care how crazy the idea. In order to make sure that the process of getting the best ideas on the table occur. Not only does it result in good ideas, but it results in buy-in, and it's a process that teaches your team, without you as a leader, how to collectively get the very best ideas. I'm at a BYU event, so I'll quote Carl G. Mazur. In an open forum of ideas, the best idea tends to win out. When a leader allows for an open forum of ideas and drives towards completion and then is willing to make a decision, and the leaders have to ultimately make a decision, you're able to get the very best thinking and you build internal capacity of your team. Now, I do want to conclude with a little bit about what happened on the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1999, Fidel Castro, Bob McNamara, and a number of other players in the process all came to the Harvard Kennedy School of Government for a panel in which they discussed everything that had happened. By this point, we had discovered, I told you to put it on the shelf, 32 non-operational, 10 to 14 days. Wrong. They had 162 nuclear warheads active, every one of which was 100 times the nuclear capacity of what was dropped on Hiroshima. So 162,000 times the nuclear power than one of the nuclear bombs that was dropped in Japan during World War II. They were operational. Bob McNamara turns to Fidel Castro and says, I need you to know that I originally argued that we should invade. Had we done so, what would you have done? And he said, Fidel Castro was so upset with the United States for usurping Cuba's sovereignty. He said unequivocally, we were going to release those nuclear weapons. Bob McNamara turned to the audience and he said, it has been opined by historians that we were within a hair's breadth of nuclear war. I am here to tell you, having been in the room, we were a hell of a lot closer than that. If you want to build internal capacity, start by harnessing and augmenting, as a leader, the very best thinking of your teams. Thank you.